USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, January 3rd, 2022. I'm Ed Trefsker alongside Jim Connolly and Derek Schooley. This podcast is brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org. Well, there aren't as many holiday tournaments as there used to be, but Wisconsin and Boston College came away with trophies in the tourneys that actually got played. This is the first time that college hockey's been played in Milwaukee since the Badgers won the 2006 National Championship, and they were the initial winners of the Quick Trip Holiday Face-Off Championship. It's been a rough first half of the season for Wisconsin. Can Tony Granato's team take some good things away from this and get some momentum out of it?
I think definitely. I think, first of all, the sad thing is there aren't a lot of Christmas tournaments or Thanksgiving tournaments anymore. And we used to, as coaches, you look forward to those. And, you looked at it as a chance to, we had the Three Rivers Classic, RPI had the tournament. There were tournaments in Alaska. I mean, there's just a shortage of good tournaments. So to see, a champion crowned in some of these fields. And I had a chance to watch the women's tournament a little bit at the Battle of the Berg here that Syracuse won, and kind of an upset in that regard with St. Cloud BU being there and Syracuse coming out on top. So I think that we're losing the luster of tournaments. But the one thing I will say, I think that's a great springboard for Wisconsin in the second half. Very disappointed that it had to end in a shootout. I wish there was another way that they could have divided a tournament. I know that the Bean Pot a couple years ago, they played a full 20-minute period. And this year they're playing a 5. According to the rules, they play a 5-minute, and then it's their choice to continue on after that. But end it in a shootout is a little anticlimactic. But good wins for Wisconsin, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think that the Badgers hopefully get a little bit of a lift off of this. And, you get a dramatic overtime win in game 1 over Yale, and then you find a way against a good Providence team to earn that tie and then get the shootout win. And, it's a different one, but the name Caulfield showing up on the score sheet in both games, I think probably is a nice thing for the Badgers. And I think that when you just try to get some sort of a catapult into the second half, winning a tournament, especially your own tournament, a home tournament. I'm looking at some of the crowds, maybe not the first night, but the second night, the Wisconsin crowd was pretty good in that building. And that's what you have to build. This is a team that has players that have been in big roles and big positions, last season. And they just have to get back to understanding and feeling that they can win night in, night out. So I think that for Tony Granato, his team, this is a good building block for the second half.
And you know what? To have a tournament at the Bradley Center again, because they used to have a holiday tournament, used to have one with the Badgers, is really neat. And like you said, maybe you said it, I think, in the Monday Morning 10. Maybe this is a precursor to potentially getting a Frozen Four back, or at least a bid, because Wisconsin's been instrumental in Frozen Fours, whether it's been in Tampa or other sites. Maybe this is just a start to the next go around, getting Milwaukee, Madison, somewhere back on a bid.
That was kind of my angle when I was watching, this tournament for far this weekend and thinking, can they do it? But, talking to our own Todd Milewski, who covers the Badgers out there, I said, does it feel like some place that could have a Frozen Four? He said 14,000 seats for hockey. This is the basketball arena, the Fiserv Forum that's been converted. It's more for basketball, this place. And listen, the Bradley Center was more for basketball too. Let's not kid ourselves. But it did fine by hockey standards back in those days. I don't know where the NCAA will go 4 years from now when we're looking at bidding again. But when you're thinking about, the fact that this has been in NHL buildings for quite some time, it doesn't feel like they want to take that step backward. Now we go back to Buffalo and the, disastrous crowds in there. And we know that the crowds weren't going to be good in Detroit if it had happened there. I think this year we'll see, back to somewhat normal crowds in Boston. But maybe 14,000 is an ideal size for a Frozen Four. People forget that too. So I wouldn't write Milwaukee off. The 2 of the 3 Frozen Fours that were hosted in Milwaukee, I got a chance to attend myself, and I thought that city did a great job by NCAA standards.
Frozen Four was in Milwaukee at the Bradley Center, the last one. So now I'm probably in double digits.
Bradley Center goes down in my book as absolutely the best media catering of any venue of any Frozen Four.
Of course it would, Ed. Of course it would.
No, I mean carving stations and all, and then we went to St. Louis, and it was like warming trays. It was a big difference.
You're the guy that sets the pregame meals up in the press box at RIT. I mean, I would come up there on purpose just to get the good food.
Yeah, I wish I could take credit for that, but yeah, you're right about the capacity. Not quite what was in the now bulldozed Bradley Center, but what about a regional? That seems like a great location for a Midwest regional. People would travel there.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're always, when I was on the committee, we're always struggling to get regionals in the West per se. And I think we've had a couple in the Midwest area or Eastern Midwest that have been considered Western regionals, but I think that if you look at that would be a great site. Green Bay did a great job the one year, that Wisconsin one where they didn't even have to leave the state. So I think that that's a great point by you, Ed, that maybe it is a regional site from here on out.
Meanwhile, the other holiday tournament, one that has been called by Dartmouth the premier holiday tournament, was the Ledyard Classic. Boston College defeated Mercyhurst, and then on the final night got a win over Dartmouth, the host team. A pretty commanding win on the second night. We talked about that for Tony Granado's team. What about for Jerry York's Eagles? Is this something to maybe get them, not that they're in the doldrums at 10-5-3, but is this something to kind of give them a little bit of momentum too?
Well, I'll tell you, they entered the break, I thought, with some pretty good momentum. And then to come out and continue that is big, I think, for Jerry York and his Eagles. They struggled a little bit right at the beginning of the season. But I think that what we saw of this team right down the stretch, they played a really exciting game against Boston University before the break. And then they come back and they really look good. And, you look at Jack McBain out there scoring 2 goals both nights, Mark McLaughlin. They're getting some good goaltending. They're playing really good defense as well. I just think that this is a BC team that, they've got a tough schedule. Hockey East, I think everybody talks about the NCHC being that gauntlet, but Hockey East is no slouch this year, top to bottom. Even the 11th place team is a tough out every single night. So I think that if BC can stay the course, they get themselves winning a few games, win 3 out of 4 games, 2 out of 3 games in the second half of the year in your league. They're probably going to be in an NCAA position. But right now, still, even after those 2 wins this week, they're on the wrong side of the NCAA bubble.
Yeah, what a good tournament that is. They do a great job of running the Dartmouth tournament. We played there one year. We had a really good, we went back-to-back tournaments that year. We played in the Three Rivers Classic here, won it, went out to Dartmouth and must have been off of our high, finished in 4th. So we had all ends of the spectrum here with tournament season, but they do a great job. It's in a beautiful area, nice little town of Hanover. I know that, like I said, that you're excited about tournaments. The premier tournament, I love Dartmouth's media Twitter site because they throw that good stuff out there. But a really good tournament, good field. I know Mercyhurst gave Boston College all they can handle in the first game, but good for Boston College to take that step. And like you said, still on the other side of the PairWise bubble and at 18. And now the PairWise starts playing into effect. And I know that we're going to talk more about PairWise implications and things like that. But gosh, there's a lot of really high profile teams that if the NCAA tournament started today would not be involved, and not a lot of Eastern teams as well.
And this is the time of year, kind of this early to mid-January time, where maybe the teams that are in the top 7 or 8 pretty much have solidified their position. So jockeying for those final spots becomes really important down the road. And we'll definitely get into that in a little bit. But let's turn to something that, I guess if canceling the World Juniors wasn't controversial enough, the whole situation with Michigan and the GLI is also controversial. It was going to be a showcase tournament, pre-assigned teams, not downtown in Detroit, but on campus at Yost and at Munn. And through various circumstances, Michigan was only allowed to play in one of the two games. And Jim, you've got a little more insight on that, but boy, that caused a lot of controversy, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, I mean, there was plenty of Michigan bashing in the week, the last week, really, since the announcement was made that they wouldn't play one of the two games. They didn't play their second game of the tournament, which was against Western Michigan. They did play against Michigan Tech the night before, and it was a scoreless tie. Talk to Mel Pearson. He kind of emphasized the fact that, they came back from break excited that they were going to play the tournament, play the two games, but was told by their staff after meeting with the medical staff and their athletic administration that they would be only allowed to play one game. And as he said, it wasn't his decision. He called it the perfect storm. He said that the team had a lot of COVID issues heading into the break. They came back, and heading into that weekend, they had some players that would only be, have practiced one or two times in the last 30 days. And I get that there's a lot of teams in this situation, but, Michigan's, one of those schools, and I think you can throw some of the Ivies in it, and, they're going to take all the precautions, because he kind of snuck the word in. I don't know if he meant to use it when I was talking to him, but he said liability is still on the minds of a lot of these schools. The bigger the schools, the more liability they look at. You don't know if, a few years down the road, there's going to be some issues with COVID. You don't know that, you played this game when you know that you didn't have anywhere near a full team. And, as he mentioned, they didn't even have enough players really to have a practice the next day after they played Tech. So I know that Mel got beat up for this. Michigan got beat up for this. I think if you have to assign responsibility to this, it's got to go more to the school than I think the coaching staff. I don't think that if anybody's known Mel Pearson, this is a guy that's been in the game for a long time. He's not a guy that's been, known to cut corners. He's pretty truthful guy. We've had him on our podcast a number of times, and he's a straight shooter. And it was tough for me, I think, having known him so well, to see him get bashed when it really was the school. And was it the right decision? I'm not even going to opine on that. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but it's one that they took a lot of heat for. Would they have taken less heat if they played Michigan Tech, knowing that they weren't going to play Western Michigan, and then after the Michigan Tech game said, hey, we've got issues, we can't even play a game tomorrow? They could have taken that route. But at that point, you've then made Western Michigan stay over in a hotel an extra night when you knew you weren't going to play the game. So there's been a lot of cancellations, all this stuff, and we don't know the situation in every locker room. We happen to know in Michigan that 5 of their players were definitely missing because they were playing in a World Junior Tournament. We don't know that with every other school. So I think this is the type of year, just like last year was. It's easy to question decisions that are made, but I wouldn't want to be in the position to make any of those decisions.
Well, okay.
Derek's been taking copious notes as I've been talking.
This is like I've got my point counterpoint going of all years. I hate the precedent. I hated it last year. I hated the fact that you can pick and choose now where you're going to play, when you can bail on games, when you can't. I mean, the fact is, and they played with 20 players. They had a full 12 forwards and 60 and 3 goalies. And you look around, Mercier's played with short players. BU played a game with 11 forwards, 5D. And then you go down the line of different things. They had still 2 first rounders, 6 draft picks playing. And if they were a road team, I know this to be true in the WCHA, they would only have been allowed to take 2 more players on the road for a game. Previous to when we went to the extra skater, they would only have been able to take 1 more player on the road. So because there are travel roster limits in certain leagues. So it's not really that much different than what they've done in the past. You look at Minnesota Duluth. When they played Northern Michigan, they had goaltender issues because of the one of their goalies got in COVID protocol. The other one had lymphoma. They played their third goalie. Are they allowed to bail out of that game for health and safety reasons? I guess I'm not a big fan of the precedent. Like I said, you play with 12 forwards and 6D when other teams are playing with 11 and 4. First year's down. I mean, I don't like the precedent it's set, and I hate that it could go in that direction that people are going to start using that. So this has been, as I told you, Jimmy, we thought we were going to have a downtime. This has been something that's been on everybody since it happened, and this has been big conversation. And but I think for a while it broke the internet for a little bit, and especially when the line charts came out. I mean, it is what it is. All the forwards have played 13 or more games, and 4 of their defensemen had played most of their games. It is what it is, and I don't like the precedent it's set. Sorry.
Well, and you can loop Yale into the question too. They had some illness, but apparently non-COVID. And I think back over the years I've seen college hockey, there are games that come up when maybe a team gets hit with the flu or a stomach virus or something. And you see games where teams have to dress 10 forwards, 4 or 5 defensemen, maybe a third string goalie, like you mentioned, ends up starting. You see that year after year. Is COVID giving cover for teams not being able to play when something like that happens?
The short answer is yes. And I think that I had this concern last year when it was almost, you'd see sometimes schools would argue about who was canceling games because of COVID. You know, schools would put out press releases saying that because of our opponents' COVID issues, we're not playing this weekend. And then the other team would say, no, it's not our COVID issues, it's their COVID issues. And you know, and you hear stories. We're not inside every locker, so we can't see and understand every issue that every team goes through. COVID has brought up the worst issues that we've probably seen in college athletics in some times in terms of player availability and player personnel. You know, it's difficult because you are kind of, even though technically you're not really limited on roster size, it's hard to put players in when you do have a cap on number of scholarships. It's not like we've increased that to 21 or 22 and said, okay, here, you've got 4 more good players you can pick from every season, because you might lose 4 or 5 players at a time to COVID, and we don't want to not play games. I think that we saw college football and some of the Power 5 conferences take these approaches that it's the responsibility of the team to stay healthy, and if you can't play, it's a forfeit. Well, we've seen that already thrown by the wayside, because even doing the most responsible things, not everybody's staying healthy. I've known plenty of people that aren't doing anything crazy and aren't, you know, breaking tons of rules and still get COVID. And, you know, we're now getting into something different, but you're right. COVID has given teams cover to say, I just don't want to play today. I'm not saying that's what Michigan did. I'm not saying that is what Yale did. I'm not saying that every cancellation that has been made because of COVID and COVID protocols this year hasn't been legitimate, but we now have this cover, and it's almost kind of a don't ask, don't tell situation where you're not supposed to ask somebody, well, did you really have enough players and you could have played the game and you just didn't want it?
But is it, I mean, I guess like I said, I'm worried about the precedent, but I guess, is it fair to those other players? Is it fair to the guys that, hey, this is our opportunity to be on the power player. This is our chance to take a big step. This is my chance to show what I have over and get an opportunity that they potentially don't. And how's it? I'm worried about one. You know, how does it play in the locker room with your players when you're not? I remember having to tell our players that we weren't playing games last year, and how disappointed they were. I mean, there was a kid going to get his first college game, and we got canceled because of it. I mean, it was devastating for him. I mean, like I said, I'm worried about how this plays in locker rooms with teams, how this plays with other teams. Does this become a precedent of we don't really need this? What happens? And I'm not saying this is that I'm not blaming Michigan. I'm not doing this. I'm just speaking to the facts. What happens if Michigan goes on a little bit of a downturn, and next, you know, they're 13, 14, or 15 pairwise. And this game could have put them on the other side of the pairwise. How does this help? What if the team is 13 or 14 or 15, and then they decide that they don't want to play a game? I mean, we're getting into some dangerous territory. And like I said, I respect the job that all the coaches are doing right now. I really respect everything that Michigan's done, but I don't like the optics of this.
Eric, when you were in the locker room last year, was it usually your call of whether you played, or was it your administration's?
It was a combination. They would call their AD would call our AD in charge, and we would talk through it. They'd have some concerns going both ways. I could tell you, I know that this is how it went down a little bit. The coaches talk. I believe, Ed, you're probably privy to how it went down with Sacred Heart. I mean, ADs talk, coaches talk, you talk to your AD, and you reach the decision. I don't know of any decisions where somebody said, I don't think we can play, and then the other team say, yes, you have to play. And I think that I know that the Merrimack Yale, I know Merrimack wanted to play because they're playing a game tonight now. So and I know I'm jumping script again, but I think you're going to see that happen a little bit. I guess we thought this was going to be a quiet Christmas, and then with that in the World Juniors, it got a little controversial. Let's put it that way.
Well, let's do some quick hits on some other teams. I want to start out with Minnesota State. Let's start out with Dryden McKay's numbers in the last 9 games. 9-0-0, 0.55 goals against, 965 save percentage. Just incredible numbers. 2 wins over St. Thomas, a win over Lake Superior State, and then 2 wins each against Michigan Tech, Bemidji State, and this past weekend, Minnesota Duluth, an overtime win at home, and then a 3-0 victory on the road in Duluth to wrap up the weekend. How good is number 1 Minnesota State?
You're the goalie. We've talked about the numbers and of that people are putting up, and this is the year I think that the Hobie Baker voters really have to look at a goalie in the final 3 and potentially. I mean, these are absurd numbers. I mean, these are absurd shutouts. Everything they're putting up, and I think they're proving their worth. Minnesota State just keeps doing it week after week, and it started in week 1 with tough scheduling, and it's continued. I'll just keep going back to Darren Blue's parting gift to Mike Hastings was a very, very challenging non-conference schedule.
Well, we say it's the year of the goalie, but this is going to be the year where the goalie splits the ballot. You're going to have at least 2 to 4 goaltenders that are going to be part of the Hobie conversation. When you look at Yaniv Peretz at Quinnipiac with a goaltending at goals against average under 1. You have Dryden McKay, a 1.25. Owen Savory at UMass Lowell, 1.29. Devin Levi, who's everybody out east keeps talking about, boy, this guy's got to easily be the Richter Award winner, is 4th in goals against with a 1.33, and save percentages for all those guys right up there. You know, Peretz is the lowest with 944, but Levi 955 save percentage, Savory 948. I'm trying to find McKay. I have to go down to McKay all the way down to 7th at 931. So, it's the year of the goalie, but there's no way our goalie's going to win the Hobie because they're going to split the goalie vote. I mean, it's going to be almost impossible to pick the Richter Award this year the way that these goalies are playing.
And here we go again. We're starting off the new year. You know what? We were going to talk about New Year's resolutions. Mine was not to argue with Jimmy. And here we go. You just went completely against everything I said. Just like we're going point. We're like the odd couple here, and Ed's just moderating us, going back and forth of where we want to go.
Hey, I'll agree with you. The fact that, boy, Minnesota State keeps shutting up any critics. If you have any reason to talk about Minnesota State not being a good team, talk about the fact that they got 2 wins against UMass, 2 wins against Duluth, a win against Providence on their schedule. And they've got some tough games still coming up. They get to play Arizona State, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Well, let's turn to St. Cloud State. They had a sweep of Bemidji State non-conference games to wrap up the first half of the season. Now they get back into NCHC play, and they take on Minnesota Duluth. Brett Larson's squad went through a bit of a gauntlet, as he described it, October into November. And these are 6 huge points on the line with Minnesota Duluth coming up this next weekend.
You talk about schedules in the NCHC, and you got Minnesota Duluth. They get Minnesota State, then they get St. Cloud. I mean, they're 8, and they're playing a 1, and then the number 1 team, and then they're going to get the number 4 team in the PairWise. So these are, I don't know how much. And let's kind of just bring it back into the Michigan deal, Jimmy. How much are you going to move? Like, let's just say Michigan would have at Western at 3 or 4, whatever they're at, 4, and Michigan at 6. How much movement is there going to be between, if you win these games, how much movement is there going to be from a 4 to a 1 and lost as far as points go?
Yeah, not a ton, but every win is pretty huge if you're one of those teams up top. Every sweep, every time you take more than 50% of a 2-game series as well. But I'll tell you, teams that will move are the teams that are down in the bubble area. If they were to beat anybody in the top 6 of the PairWise right now, those are really valuable points. And if you've beaten one of those teams already, now you're almost rooting for that team to play better. If you've already beat Minnesota State, which not a lot of teams have, if you've already beat Michigan, you're rooting for Michigan to succeed, because that's the only way, if you're lower, that you can bump up without actually getting wins yourself. And I've kind of watched UMass Lowell in the PairWise the last few weeks. They were kind of sitting around 15th and not moving, and then got up to 13th, and I think they beat St. Lawrence one game, got to 12th, and without playing another game, they're now at 10. And that's showing that there's a really close difference in the RPI, probably between 9 and 15 right now. And if your RPI just switches and goes ahead of one of the teams that's ahead of you, we've already talked about how much RPI matters. That it's not just a criteria, but it's the tiebreaker. They are in a position, you're in a position, if you're in that bubble between 9 and 15 right now, 1 win, boom, you jump up. 1 loss, wow, you fall down.
And that's where we were the one year. We were 5-1-1 non-conference, and we went 0-4 against Niagara. And Niagara's non-conference record wasn't very good, but every time, Ohio State or a team we beat kept winning, we kept climbing, as did Niagara, because they had beaten us. So you're not only watching the teams that you've beat, you're continuing to be big fans of other teams. I mean, you go down the list, and North Dakota, probably a big fan of Quinnipiac from here on out in the ECAC to climb a little bit higher. I mean, you just talk about different things like that, but it is, you become scoreboard watchers, and you become rooting for the teams that you've beat to win games here on out. So to go back to your whole point there, Ed, I think there's a lot going on, and at Minnesota Duluth and St. Cloud, this is going to be another big series, and not moving for them, but moving for other people.
Well, your discussion on the PairWise is a good segue into the last item in this first segment, and that's Arizona State. They had a nice home sweep over the weekend of Cornell. They sit right now 25th in the PairWise at 12-10 overall. They're 17th in strength of schedule in the RPI, so they're getting into some good spaces. My concern is, even if they do really well the rest of the way out, say they go 10-2 the rest of the way, are 22-12, in the range that would get you into the tournament, they end the season with a couple of games against LIU and 4 against Alaska. Those are not going to help their strength of schedule. How is that all going to balance out? And I guess let's talk about on the ice. Is Arizona State for real? Are they doing what they need to do to get into the tournament?
I think if you watch the press conference announcing that Robert Morris was back, I was in Greg Power's office. So I got a chance to spend a little bit of time with him before Christmas. We were down in Phoenix for a tournament with my son, and I only saw him. I think the one thing that really could hurt them is that Colorado College loss right before Christmas. You got to hope Colorado College goes on and wins some big games for them, so that loss isn't as big. But I think in talking with him and Mike Field, at that point they needed to at least to get to 22 wins. There are 12 now, which puts them at 10-2. Like you said, those 6 against Fairbanks and 4 against Fairbanks and 2 against LIU to end all at home aren't going to help them, but those can really hurt them. If you really look, they've got to go get. They can't lose to. They got to get wins at BU. They can't lose to RIT at RIT, and they've got to get one at Mankato. So I think if you go split on the road with BU, both at RIT, split at Mankato, and then get the 6 at home, I think you're talking at 22 wins. That's a pretty good resume with the strength of schedule. But is that for real? Their goaltending has been really solid lately. Cole Brady really was looked for. Like he got pulled a couple times against Denver. Their goaltending was in shambles. I think we talked about it. He was outstanding this weekend. And you got Johnny Walker back, which obviously is he led the nation in goals a couple of years to go along with the guys that are scoring for him now. So is that a real team? They might be peaking at the right time, but these next 6 games, all on the road, will tell you where they're at, because they're not going to climb. They got Lindenwood at home Lindenwood for 2 as an exhibition game, doesn't count for anything. And then they're at 6 after that. I think they go 2 to Fairbanks and then home for 2. So they do have a lot of road games, some bonus points. I don't know. You tell me, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, I think that this weekend could be big for them against Boston University. If Boston University has a second half, I think that Boston University is actually poised to have a pretty good second half. That might actually make this weekend series much more difficult. And if they actually knock BU off in both games, BU would really have to have a second half of these to matter a ton. Listen, I look at just circle that last week of January when they play Minnesota State. Those 2 games, you've got to find a way to come away with more than 50% of the points. And if you do that, you're putting yourself in good position. You made the simple point. The games against RIT and the 6 games to end the series against the season against the other 2 independents are not negotiable. If you want to make the tournament, you've got to go 8-0 in those games. But after that, get something to Mankato. You could even, maybe potentially lose, 3 out of 4 points or whatever, however you want to say it. Lose 75% of your points this weekend. But if you sweep Mankato at Mankato, the amount of bonus points you will get for that might put you right into the NCAA tournament.
These are like tournament championship games. These are playoff implication games for Arizona State right now.
Yeah, it's strange that you'd play a series against Minnesota State and think that that's your conference championship, or but then you then have to go perfect in your next 6 after that against some teams that many would consider weaker opponents.
See, we were on that last year and I told our guys we played LIU, and LIU had been dangerous. And I mean, we went into that series saying we can't afford to lose these games because our resume can't have a loss right now against them. Now, PairWise, they got it. They're going to have to get wins, and because they don't have the conference tournament. But I like where they're at right now. They were, that one game against CC. I bet you if we had the PairWise predictor that you'll have at the end of the year or whatever, if you switch that, I bet you'd see them around 20, maybe 20 in that range. Because I know that they would have been at 23 if they would have won that game. Now climb Cornell. How about Cornell though? Those are tough losses for them because they've fallen all the way down to 25 with a record that's really good. I mean, they're at 26 at 9-3-1. Tough one.
That's those overtime wins that we talked about that only count 55%. Well, let's take a break. We got a little bit more to cover, including COVID's impact on college hockey and the World Juniors. This episode is brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. Visit dcu.org.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Sometimes it's not about wanting a new car, it's about needing one. And I needed one I could rely on. So I got an auto loan with DCU. They offer the same low rates on both new and used cars, and I was able to borrow a little extra to make a used car as good as new. My auto loan from DCU means a ride I can finally rely on, which feels like a pretty big thing. What will DCU mean to you? Insured by NCUA. Membership required. Visit dcu.org.
Welcome back to USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefsker alongside Jim Connolly and Derek Schooley. Just when we thought we were out of the woods on COVID, the Omicron variant has come along. It's more transmissible. Rates of tests or test positive are up, and it's impacting teams, at least with testing, even if players are not having symptoms. And that's meant a number of postponed and canceled games over the last week or two. Are we in for this for a while? It sounds like things may peak, but maybe won't peak till March, which is when the season is over. And then we also saw schools finding games to fill in. What's the landscape going to look like going forward in this next month or two?
I got a tremendous amount of respect for Penn State for going on the road to Army to get a makeup game in. I'm sure Army's got to go back to them at some point. But I think that teams are going to do what they have to do. I think we're running out of non-conference games to be able to fix that, though, Jimmy. I think we were down to, before Christmas, we were down to about 15% non-conference games left, and we're probably down to about 5 now. So there's not going to be much of that moving around. But, you got Merrimack and UMass going to play a non-conference game this week because they lost some games. I think you're going to see a lot of different schedules. And I know that we talked about this before the show, Ed. You're going to have RIT and Sacred Heart make one of them up at RIT while they're on a trip. And you'll probably have to get really creative with the schedule to get the second game out there. And I can't tell you if this is going to continue. I can only tell you that I hope that we get back to more of a normalcy sooner than later, because we've all been playing with these for sickness and people with the sniffles and stomach flu and flu for years. And it doesn't seem to be as dangerous, this variant. But once again, I'm not a doctor, and I'd hate to be making those decisions. Props to the teams that are trying to get games to fill in and make it work, though.
Yeah, the one thing I will tell you is, having lived through it last year in Hockey Eastland, I don't want to see us get back to a world where on Tuesday morning, the commissioner has to figure out who's playing who, lets a team know on Wednesday, and then you have to play the games on Friday and Saturday, and then you have to come up with a power index and not a standings at the end of the season to decide who your regular season champion is. It just, I credit Steve Metcalf and his staff for what they accomplished last year in Hockey East to get some semblance of a season played and not just pull the plug as many programs did. But at the same time, that was a nightmare. And I know, having talked to Steve just before the holidays, he doesn't want to see that happen as well. But I want to hopefully see things get back on track. There'll be cancellations. Schedules, I think, are going to start to look like NHL schedules at some point, where you're playing Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Tuesday, Friday, Saturday, Tuesday, and you're playing 3 to 4 games a week in a calendar week, and that's really difficult. But I know that these players and these coaches want a season. They want a postseason, and they want an NCAA tournament. And the only way you get through that is to get through this regular season first. And I think that you'll see a lot of commitment from both leagues, coaches, and players to get through this. And
I don't want to see, and I've seen people on the internet and Twitter, and probably the worst thing that you do over break was to watch Twitter tremendously. I don't want to see us not. We've spent too much time talking about the PairWise, wasted too much of our breath. Now that people go, well, maybe the PairWise shouldn't count, and we should just stick
it ran through my head yesterday, Derek. It ran through my head.
I don't want to see that. I want it to be. I want this to, It was hard. I thought we did a really good job as a committee last year, but it was hard. And we had a year to plan how we were going to do it from November. To have this thrown on the committee would be really hard at this point. But I hope that we can get back to normalcy sooner than later.
I don't see how you can throw the PairWise out right now, because the bulk of the non-conference games have been played. And the reason for not using the PairWise last year is you didn't have non-conference games, so you had no way to weigh leagues against each other. When you get into the leagues, though, it may mean some changes if everybody can't get their complete schedule in. Leagues have got backup plans in place to use points percentages and things like that. I think we could see that, but I don't see the PairWise being thrown out unless the season completely collapsed right now.
That's a good point. And we've got 95% of the PairWise, the non-conference games played. I think we know where the leagues stand. I think if you just shut the non-conference down right now, I think we'd know where everybody was. So that's a good point. But hey, if Jimmy, we didn't talk about this, Jimmy, that we weren't even going to, if you were thinking about it and I was thinking about it, it means it's out there. We just don't, I don't think we want to get to that point.
Well, let's move on to the World Juniors. I want to highlight some great reporting that was done by our friend Chris Peters, who writes for his own Substack site, Hockey Sense, and also Daily Faceoff. He broke the news about the World Juniors being canceled, and he did a podcast episode that was about an hour long, really breaking things down. And he brought up a really good point. December 15th, when the teams went to Red Deer and Edmonton, Omicron was just barely coming on the scene. By December 30th, when things were canceled, just over 2 weeks later, it was spreading all around the globe, and the landscape changed very quickly. But he and some players, including Slovakia's goalie, were very critical of the situation. The general public in restaurants in the same hotel, a wedding happening in the hotel in Red Deer, and some of the things. It looks like they're going to try to get things together in the summer. That's going to be very difficult. But first of all, any postmortem on this? And then secondly, what's the implication as we look toward the Olympics with the NHL out and maybe some college players being asked to participate?
Well, I agree, with everything that Chris said, that this was not well run, this tournament. You perfected how last year's World Juniors were run by keeping players in a bubble. And you could have really done that again. Even though you allow fans into a stadium, does not mean that the players aren't in some sort of a bubble. You give them their own hotels. They don't really leave their hotels. You give them their own space within hotels so that you're really surrounding the players with players and not with a ton of other people that maybe aren't tested on a daily basis. If you're going to take a bubble away, you also have to take away testing for the vaccinated is another thing. So if you're going to continue to test and you're going to have basically a shutdown forfeit situation, which is what this tournament did for just one case in any team, then you can't have a non-bubble situation. So I think the IHF once again has failed its players. They continue to do it, and the Olympics will be no different. If I'm a college coach, there's no way I'm sending my kids to the Olympics because it's going to be worse. And you get COVID inside of China, and you're going to be forced to stay there for 2 weeks. I wish the Olympics would be honestly postponed a year like they did with the Summer Olympics. I think we're in a position where that should have already been done. It won't be because there's too much TV money involved and stuff like that. But I think that there's no way the Olympic hockey tournament goes off without tons of hitches, just like we saw at the World Juniors. And I think that we're just looking for more disasters.
You know what? It's going to be hard, though, to have that conversation when you have a chance to go to the Olympics, or a player come into your office and say, you know what, I'm willing to accept this. And because once again, just like you got to be able to have your locker room be in a good place. And it'll be hard to have that conversation. If somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to go to the Olympics, and then you say, no, I don't think you should. Next thing you know, they're playing games in the Olympics and not happy. So I think it's a lot easier to say that there's no way a coach should do it until that person comes and sits across from you and has that conversation. I think holiday season for the IHF was horrendous. I'm not even going to go to the World Juniors. It's been beat up. It's been dissected. Chris Peters did a great job. I'm going to go to the canceling of the U18 women's World Championships in Sweden for US and Canada. I mean, they didn't even make an attempt to put them in a bubble. They didn't. They just canceled it. And then to be able to say, oh, well, cancel doesn't mean it's canceled. It means it's people got to come together. Cancel to me means canceled. I don't know what your definition of cancel is. Cancel means cancel. It doesn't mean now Sweden and the US have to put a proposal together. That would be postponed. They said cancel. And I think the community of all the coaches, all the players that are going to be women's hockey players stepped up and really took that to another level. And they've got to make this right. They've got to make it right for the U18 Worlds and the women, and then they've got to make it right for the World Juniors, or they're going to lose a tremendous amount of credibility. I mean, the interviews that the IHF president did, I mean, he needs a new PR guy.
Yes.
I mean, that PR, the statements that were written, once again, we're going politics today. We're going everything. I did this just to keep my name out in the public. Now I'm like this controversial guy that you're making me fight you on everything.
I can see your face as the show is going on. It's got a little bit of red here, Derek. So.
Yeah. This is my first real, and we've got all these topics. I mean, this is the first one that I've really got fired up over. I mean, I guess because I got my job back now, I could be a little bit more animated, but I feel bad for the women. On top of that, I mean, not just the World Juniors. And yes, I think the Olympics could be a disaster if they don't handle this correctly.
Well, when we talk about the Olympics, one name that came up in a discussion I was involved in was Owen Power. He came back to Michigan for a second season. If the Sabres had wanted him signed, they could have signed him. Maybe he would have played a little in the American Hockey League, but probably would have been in Buffalo in a difficult rebuilding situation. He comes back to Michigan, part of a team that is poised to challenge for a national championship. People say, well, why would he pass up the Olympics when he can do it? Well, if he has the career that he should have, he's got probably 2 or 3 other opportunities to represent Canada in the Olympics. But only one shot this year to vie for a national championship. And people don't really understand the college game. I think that he probably, he's back there in Michigan because he wants to do that. Maybe Derek wants to disagree.
Yeah. You know what, though? I understand that. But what about the guy that's not Owen Power? What about the one that this is their one shot? Their one chance to go. And what about, how do you say no? Because what if it's that 5th round that they've got a piece of the puzzle that they just need this guy that they think. And I'm not going to, and he wasn't a college guy, but I'm going to go back to Ryan Zapolsky from Mercyhurst when he went. What if there's a goalie out there that they want to take to the Olympics, and you don't know if you're going to be that next day? What if Dryden McKay, they want to take him? Are you sure that Dryden McKay is ever going to get that opportunity to play in the Olympics again? So yeah. How do you say that? I mean, say no to that if you're the coach, if they're willing to accept the responsibility and really want to take that. It's challenging. It's going to be interesting conversations in coach's office. I understand the Owen Power, but there are the other ones besides that are going to be hard to say to people.
And they're going to be finding some players that are not playing in the NHL. The name that's been bandied about. In fact, Chris Peters, when he was a guest with us, mentioned Strauss Mann, former Michigan goalie who's in Sweden now, is somebody for the U.S. team. I can see your point on that. If you're on a team, say you're a good team, and maybe you're not. Well, how do you say who's essential on Michigan, for example? But I mean, if you're somebody on another team and you have an opportunity, and what if you're a player from Europe and you have an opportunity? You're playing U.S. NCAA hockey and you have an opportunity. I guess you have to weigh that and see how it comes in. It's going to be individual decisions, I guess.
I think Dryden McKay was a bad example because you're talking about the number one team in the nation, a chance to win a national championship. He's essential to that team.
And he only returned there to win a national championship.
Yeah, that was. But I'm just saying, what if there's that guy on? I guess
there will be those cases.
Yep.
there'll be a ton of those cases throughout, and they're going to be at top teams, I bet. Some of the top players in the country right now are on top teams. Look at the top 10 in scoring, and a lot of them are on teams that, whether they're in their league or nationally, they're some of the best players, and they would be the ones that would likely be targeted. And you have to also look at when it comes to, say, the U.S., it's always going to be players that have probably been through the program, have played in Old World Juniors or U18 or whatever the various national championships or world championships are. So I think that those players that'll get targeted, all have major roles on their team at this current time.
What if you're Canada and you want Devin Levi as your goalie? I mean, what's Northeastern going to do there? That just blows up their season.
Right.
Yeah.
We really got into it today, didn't we?
Happy New Year.
We're all going to get out the sphygmomanometers right now and check the blood pressure. But I think we're going to wrap it up right there. This episode has been brought to you by DCU, Digital Federal Credit Union. What will DCU mean to you? Membership required. Find out today by visiting dcu.org. For Jim Connolly, for Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefsker, and we'll catch you next time.
Happy New Year.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.